flight number 36. We are here with Kathryne Imabayashi. Did I get that just right?
Perfect. Perfect.
Very good. I was kind of practicing. I listened to someone else in one of your other interviews, so I'd kind of been practicing. But when it's a Japanese last name, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yes, it
Okay,
is.
so sometimes we have a hard time wrapping our tongues around names that aren't as familiar. So I'm very pleased with myself. So I would like to ask people who are watching to please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Help our channel grow so I can keep bringing you more authors and more people will find more great books. In the meantime, welcome, Kathryne. Now, as I looked at some of your sites and things, two things jumped out at me. You have a huge background in education and travel. Are those things linked or completely separate?
No, they're very much linked. Education started first, and then it moved into, kind of a nomadic existence and just moving around, connected with education, connected with my job.
Okay. What are some of the places you've been to?
Well, I started in Canada. I started on the east coast of Canada and worked my way across to the west coast. And then there was no place else to go in Canada. And I read a book and jumped on a plane a few months later and relocated to Japan. And so I stayed here for the first time. I stayed for 19 years. I was in the international school system to begin with here, teaching kindergarten, early years, early elementary. I left after having been in the school for 10 years, I think, and started up my own international preschool with my husband for 6 years. Then went back to the international school for my last 2 years in Japan at that point. And we went to Beirut, to Lebanon, for our son's middle school and high school. And up until that point, I was in the classroom for the whole time, mostly early years, early elementary, some in upper elementary. When he moved and he came back to Canada for university, that's when I moved into administrative roles. So we went for 2 years to Bangkok, to Tbilisi, and then we went for a year. Bangkok in Thailand. Then we went to Tbilisi, Georgia for a year, then went to Doha for a year, and then returned to Japan, stayed in leadership roles, and spent 3 years in Tokyo, 2 years in Hiroshima, and then finally we retired close to where we had started in Kyushu.
So your life did not go according to plan at all, I'm guessing.
Not my plan. Someone else had a plan.
That's what I always say about my children. We had briefly discussed that. And in fact, because your book is about raising boys, I made a point of wearing my shirt with all my kids' handprints. So
that's beautiful.
We've got Carlin green, we've got Kenan light blue. I had to write my cheat sheet. We've got Michael in yellow. We have, where's the orange? We've got Matthew somewhere here in orange. I can't see it on the camera. And Connor is the red handprint. And then his twin brother is the dark blue handprint that's somewhere around there. And John Paul was not born yet. So, and then my daughters are also on there. Kiva is purple and Kara, of course, is pink. So,
Wow.
And then I wore my mother's ring, so it just seemed too perfect. I do want you to retell the story of how you met your husband. It's a
how I met
story.
him or how I married him?
Both, yeah.
Well, we had. So when I came to Japan, I knew nobody. I couldn't speak. I couldn't read. Nothing, and I befriended a foreigner. And we started doing social things together. And I love live music. And so we started going to, there was one live place, but it had country music. And I was not a country music fan, but it was live music. And that ended up being the place that I met my husband. His band played there. maybe once a month or something. And so I was there, and he just became a very good friend.
Mhm.
He was not normal, like as far as, he didn't ask me if I could use chopsticks or, the typical questions you ask a foreigner. He asked me about
Mhm.
religion and
Oh.
politics and travel,
Mhm.
and we didn't have a common language. So it was quite interesting how we were able to develop that friendship. After maybe 6 years, 5, 6 years, um, it was I had made a decision to go back to Canada. I was changing careers. I was going back to university. I wanted to get my master's in social work. I wanted to change from education, go into social work. And so I knew it was my last year in Japan. At the beginning of that last year, we started a relationship. And I said that I was happy to have a relationship, but I wanted to be upfront from the very beginning, made it very clear it's not going anywhere. We're just going to have a fun 1 year time. And although he kept saying, that was fine, but throughout the year, he said consistently, um, we will stay together. We will get married. We will have children. And I was like, no, we're not getting married. I can't have children. I'm going back to Japan. So, but it was it was maybe I never would have gotten married if it hadn't worked that way, because thinking that I was not thinking about the future with him, let me allow our time together just to be pure. I had no preconceived ideas. I wasn't thinking, oh, does this mean he's going to leave me? Or, is this a sign that, we should, work harder on our relationship? There was none of that. We went through normal things with a relationship, but I didn't have any, I wasn't going to sabotage it because I was
Mhm.
looking at the future. And I think that's the reason that we ended up staying together.
I have to ask, how did you, I actually know a couple, I mean, they're quite old by now, but he was Chinese, she was American. They were married 13 years. They never did learn each other's language. How did you communicate with him without sharing a language?
Well, it makes me a very strong advocate for the depths of communication, and that language, a common language, is only one part of that. So
Mhm.
it, I think what helped was that, with time, my Japanese got a little better. But what
Mhm.
really helped was his ability he has a phenomenal memory. So if I could give him some basic ideas of what I was trying to say, he would capture the word and then he would retain that. So as our relationship went on, he could sprinkle in more English words.
Okay.
Um, so I think we just both grew. But I also think that's another reason we stayed together, because I could never make the assumption that I understood what he said and that what he said was what he meant. So if I would
Mhm.
get upset about something that caused some strong emotions, by the time we got to the point of what it really meant, those emotional parts were kind of put to the side and we could just deal with whatever the conversation was. So it was quite helpful, actually.
Mhm. That's interesting. This friend of mine, I actually knew her because we both played Diji, which is the Chinese flute,
Yeah.
in the, I think it was called the Minneapolis Chinese Music Ensemble. And the leader of the group had been her husband. And she said to me once, the reason we work so well together is you can't fight if you don't share a language. So,
Exactly.
she said he even had to propose to her through translator. So it was a really neat story. And I don't know why they ended up divorced. I didn't ask, but she was a neat person. He was a neat guy. He was quite amazing, but he never did speak English. And he'd been in America about 20 years by the time I knew him. So, but anyway, go on with your story. You ended up having a child you didn't expect to have.
Well, that last year and then when I thought it was my last year in Japan, I went through all of the procedures to have my application accepted at the university that I wanted to go to. I had my sister helping me with, transcripts and payments. That was before internet. So, everything
A
was
lot
done
harder.
a lot harder. But the long and short of it is that everything that could go wrong went wrong. Absolutely everything. And by the end of it, it was getting to the beginning of summer, the end of the school year. And I got the final notice from the university saying, you missed this deadline. This was lost. So you're not accepted for this next academic year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just flabbergasted because I thought that was the path I was supposed to be taking. I was sure of it. And I called my friend and I said, I was very upset. And I said, I'm not quite sure what to do about all this. And she very calmly said, well, maybe you are supposed to get married to him. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought about it for a minute and I called him. And I said, were you serious about wanting to marry me? And he said, yes. And I said, well, let's plan it for the summer. It looks like that's what we're supposed to be doing. I had not met his parents. I hadn't told my parents I was seeing anyone. But we ended up going back to Canada a couple of months later, getting my parents put a little wedding together. And that was the beginning of it. As far as having a child, I physically couldn't have a child. And he felt so strongly that we would have a child that I agreed before we went to Canada to get married to see a specialist, and one thing led to another. And I had a surgery by this specialist in the field that had a good success rate, but really it was he'd only done that procedure 4 times, but 3 of them worked, and I was number 5, and luckily it worked. And I had to get discharged early to make the flight to go home and get married. But then the first time that I was ready to see if we could conceive, our little guy just hopped on board, and that was it.
I'm loving your story in part because there's so many parallels to my own that you and I had discussed on our previous conversation that neither of us expected to be married. My first husband, so I didn't expect to, I thought I'd be lucky if I had 1 or 2 kids, and I ended up with 9. Surprise. My first husband is from Ireland, so I was curious, as you were talking about, you hadn't even met each other's parents. What were their reactions, either one of them, to I'm marrying someone from across the world?
Well, I think for both of us, both my husband and myself, we were older. Like when our son was born, so it was just a year after we got married, I was almost 40, and he's 4 years younger than me. And I think his parents too were kind of just so relieved that he said he was getting married. Like, he was the only. So it was kind of, and my parents, the same kind of thing. They were just happy. They were concerned because it was a different culture and they'd never met him. But it was one of those things, as soon as you meet the person, then whatever preconceived ideas you'd had culturally shift. So the only stipulation was before we could move forward, we had to meet my husband's grandmother. She was a bit of a seer, and so she had to give her okay. She uses numerology, and she had to say that our numbers fit and kind of give us her blessing, and then it was okay.
So my experience was, we laughed about this. Thank goodness it worked out fine. But I met my husband in Boston when I was 19 and he was 20. I had gone there for the summer. He had come on a J1 student visa. And before he left, sometime before that, his dad, I think, had told him, if you ever marry an American, we'll disown you. And then one of his mom's friends, before he came to the States for the summer, said, you watch out. Those American girls get their hooks into our boys and they don't let go. And his mother laughed and said, not my son. And 3 months later, he called her, Mom, I'm getting married. But it did work out. They, as you say, preconceived notions. They had a lot of very negative ideas about Americans because, number one, they saw tourists who could sometimes be kind of obnoxious, to be honest. And they watched programs like Dallas.
Yeah.
And that's what they thought of Americans. And so when they met me, you know, the joke kind of became, oh, you're not so bad for an American, you know, but it was good-natured teasing. And I really, really liked his dad, and his dad entirely changed his mind, obviously. So, but it was an interesting experience. And so you went on to have a son,
Mhm.
and you ended up writing a book about raising boys. So what led to you writing a book about raising boys, other than obviously the fact that you have one?
It was, you know, for many people, there's always that one moment, that turning moment that puts you on a path that you hadn't planned, or lets you know what it is that, you know, what's the drive.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was about 3, I took him fishing one Saturday. His dad was working, and so he and I, beautiful day. So he's only 3. He's got a plastic fishing rod, a little cassette player, and we go down. There's a creek not so far off the main road, but it's treed, it's in the woods. But I didn't think anything of it. I'm in Japan. I feel quite confident as a woman. I felt safe. There was no concern whatsoever. And we went down, and we were having a lovely, lovely Saturday morning together. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw what in my mind was a gang of young boys, 5 or 6 young boys, coming down this treed path. And when I saw them coming down, there was something so guttural, so instinctive, and it was pure fear. And it was like, oh my God, it's a gang. How am I going to protect my son and myself? And the boys came down, and ironically, at that particular time, I was teaching upper elementary. So I had just finished teaching grade 5. The next year, those children were going into middle school. And I know that that is often a summer of incredible growth with these young boys. And so these boys coming down were that age. So their bodies were bigger, but they were still just little boys inside. So we had a lovely time together, and, you know, of course, there was nothing negative about it all. It was a lovely morning together,
Mm-hmm.
and that could have been it. But then I went home, and it was like, you know, like a dog with a bone, that kind of a saying. And I'm very analytic and very reflective, and I tried to think why did I react that way? Like, I know of, I have no, you know, experiences in the past that would bring up that sense of fear or anxiety, or I could not think of any reason for me to feel that fear. There was nothing. I was going nowhere with that one. And then I had this image in my head. Okay, my little guy is 3. So in, you know, 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, is there going to be another mom who sees my little boy and is filled with fear? And the only reason is because he's a boy. It's not because of what he's wearing, what he's doing, what he's saying. It's simply because he's a boy. And that just, it was like someone put a knife in my heart. It was like, that's
Yeah.
not right. It's just not right. And so that started it. That is why I tried to find out, why is that the situation? And then what can I do about it?
Can I ask, do you think it was like, if it had been just 1 or 2 boys, would you have felt the same fear, or did it also have to do with a large group coming toward you?
It could have been the group part of it, because like I said, I felt quite confident. I'd taken my, you know, women's self-defense courses. And so if it had just been 1 or even 2, maybe young boys coming down, I probably would have had the confidence not to jump to that. I think, I don't know for sure, but that it was a group and that they were male filled me with fear.
One thing I learned when I got pregnant, now I was almost 20 when I got pregnant, which is, you know, a clever way of not admitting I was 19 when I got pregnant. Before that, I had been quite confident, quite secure. I was living in Boston at the time. I got off, I think I used to get off work around 11 or midnight, and I would walk from Kenmore Square around by Fenway Park to where my apartment was. I had no fear. And as soon as I knew I was pregnant, everything changed like that. I realized for me, I believe it was because all of a sudden I said, wait, I'm not taking chances with myself anymore. I'm taking chances with this child's life. And I can't, I need to think of potential dangers. And I would think there might have been an element to that of that too.
That makes sense.
And yet it's still, I totally see where you're coming from of why am I afraid of these boys who have not done a thing to me?
Yeah.
So when you had a boy, I'm just curious if you had any preconceived notions, there's that phrase again, about what boys and girls are like, what raising a boy versus what raising a girl is like.
By that point in my career, I had already spent, a lot of time in the classroom. So I had I had a sound foundation on what I thought, was kind of your average little girl, little boy kind of thing. From a personal perspective, I grew up in a highly populated female environment. There's 6 children and only one of them was a boy, and he was right in the middle.
Okay.
So I knew about girls and felt very confident in my understanding. And I really was nervous about if this baby was going to be a girl, because I really worried that she would be like me, that she would be a highly sensitive person and have to learn to kind of not be hurt so deeply all the time by things that are going on in her environment. So I was really concerned about having a little girl and putting my stuff on her. So when it was a boy, I was thrilled because it was kind of, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And I'm not going to put my stuff on. That was what I thought at the time anyway. And so it just left me wide open to learn and be curious and just try to figure out everything I could about this really pure and perfect little boy. I will say when he was maybe 4 is really when there was a particular incident, and it surprised me at how deep his emotions were. Like he saw something like it was a country like it was livestock. So they were doing different things, and they were doing an oxen pull. But when they were doing the oxen pull, in order to make the ox pull harder, they had a stick or a whip, and they were hitting them. And my son he was beyond consoling. He just thought that was so wrong, that man was hurting. And that surprised me that there was that depth. So that's as close as I can remember to having any kind of bias that was brought to my attention through him.
Right. Now, the title of your book, I'm trying to look for my notes. Raising Boys to be Remarkable Men. Did I get that?
Raising boys who become remarkable men.
Okay. Do you have a reading ready for us?
I do. Let's pull it up here. I actually reread the book, trying to figure out what I felt would be the most meaningful for people to hear. And I decided on the end of the book, actually. And so I'm beginning, when I'm talking and I refer to I'm talking about parents.
Okay.
So these are the final thoughts. Their whole world will be shaken up when they become aware of how deeply entrenched gender bias is. They will never see males the same. They will never witness the media without picking up on the subtle messages being sent out about how boys are supposed to feel and behave. They will begin to question everything. That is when the magic begins to happen, eyes wide open. Once you take the initial deep dive into understanding about gender bias and the complex emotional landscape of boys, your perspective will undergo a profound transformation. Nothing, absolutely nothing, will have more of an impact on your son than you. Parents are powerful influences in their child's world. Even if things don't change in his world fast enough, he will be able to balance his world if he knows you understand and you have a strong, deep connection. To have that kind of a relationship, you need to understand intimately how the outside world affects your boy's inner emotional world. Boys are treated differently than girls. It's a fact. Much of how or why that happens is unconscious, but it still greatly impacts how our children feel about themselves and how they see themselves in the world. Little boys are often conflicted and confused with the dichotomy of this. They don't understand why adults around them are so protective and sympathetic with the little girls, and at the same time, they are meant to feel that they are supposed to be tough and not need that protection or warm and fuzzy interactions. They are confused and then angry at how unfair school seems at times. The little girls seem to do everything right, and the teachers love them. The boys struggle to stay still and on task, and often the apparent cause of a tired teacher's lack of empathy. Little boys start to lose themselves and feel they are just not good enough. But that little boy, whose parents have fallen into the embrace of this book, is greeted at the end of his school day with love and understanding. His emotional bank is gradually replenished. His parents understand the challenges. They're on the same team. When we stay curious about a boy's inner world and respect how best he communicates with us, then he'll feel safe to share that world, even when he feels most vulnerable. We are his anchor. In a sometimes turbulent world, we can set the groundwork to always be that safe haven. Consider this anonymous poem. For every strong woman tired of faking weakness, there is a weak man tired of faking strength. For every woman tired of faking foolishness, there is a man tired of having to act as a model of wisdom. For each woman tired of being labeled as an emotional female, there is a man who has been denied the right to cry and be sensitive. For every sportswoman whose femininity is questioned, there is a man forced to compete in order to give testimony to his virility. For every woman tired of being considered a sexual object, there is a man concerned about his sexual performance. For every woman who has not had access to a dignified salary, there is a man forced to bear the economic responsibility of another human being. For every woman who ignores the secrets of car mechanics, there is a man who doesn't know how to boil an egg. For every woman that steps toward her freedom, there is a man who rediscovers the road to liberty. The human race is a two-winged bird. One wing is female, the other is male. Unless both wings are equally developed, the human race will not be able to fly. We are all different, men, women, boys, and girls. No two humans are the same. Imagine a world where our differences are acknowledged, respected, and valued, where we live together in a world where we collaborate and support each other rather than compete and undermine. Maybe we won't change the world this time round, but we can change our own world and the world of our children. Eventually, that will create a two-winged bird that soars.
Beautiful. I love that you're acknowledging, we are different. And I grew up in the 70s when William Has a Doll and Free to Be You and Me were hugely popular. And we were told boys and girls are exactly the same. And if you would just treat them the same, they'd pretty much be unisex people. And I quickly found out with my oldest child, my son, that wasn't true. But your reading kind of reminded me of a funny story. My daughter and I, and my older daughter is a little bit of a tomboy. Like she's in her 30s and still doing horse riding tricks, like standing up as the horse canters around, things like that, jumping on and off a moving horse. My younger daughter is very much, all into pink. As I mentioned, her handprint is pink, and likes her bows and ribbons and things. And so one day, one of my twins, who's now in the Army, who was always repairing things around the house for us, who was always right there, and this is when he was 14, 15, as young as 12, 13, he was doing all this stuff. If the drain backed up in the laundry room, he would be down there snaking it out for us. And so one day, a button came off his, I think it was his Army pants. And so we went over to Joann Fabrics. We were buying the thread and the button, and the sales clerk ringing us up is being very chatty and happy. And we're like, "Yeah, gotta sew this on for her brother." And the sales clerk, obviously into, let's all be the same, says, "You tell him to sew that button on himself. Boys can sew." And we're like, "Yes, they can." But then he'll tell us to snake out the filthy, nasty drain, and we don't want to.
Yeah.
We're like, you know what? We're happy with this division. He's happy. We're happy. And if we weren't, I guess we'd change it. But all three of us were. So, please don't tell us to ignore gender stereotypes, which obviously she thought that's the only reason we were doing this. And it's like, I don't know, maybe, but on the other hand, we're all happy with this arrangement. So you talked about biases, apart from some of the ones you sort of touched on, that boys are expected to sit still and they have a hard time sitting still, and so on. What are some of the biases that you really kind of address throughout the book, or that you would like to see society change?
A lot of it is around communication, because
Okay.
I think if when we really want to have these deep relationships with the males in our world, we have to, I'm speaking as a female, we have to be really aware of the differences in our communication styles. And when we are not aware of those differences, then we put the same expectations on the males in our life that we have with the females. We think everyone thinks the same and communicates the same as we do. And that doesn't make for smooth communication. So, for example, for little boys, one of the examples I have in the book is simply, so a common complaint of parents is they will be, for example, if I'm in the kitchen and I am making dinner, my son has come home from school. He's, maybe, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, that age group. And he's gone to his room while I'm making dinner. He's doing whatever he's doing in his room. I know I've got about 5 minutes left. It's going to be on the table. So, and I know you're supposed to be giving kids, a heads up before you ask them to transition into something else. So I call upstairs and I say, dinner will be ready in 5. And I go back to do my things. There's no response, of course. In 5 minutes, I call upstairs and say, come on down, dinner's on the table. And then I go back to doing my, last minute things that I'm going to do before he's actually there. And then 5 minutes goes by and he's not there yet. And so I go back to the stairs and I call up a little bit louder and say, come on, dinner's getting cold, come downstairs. And I do a few more things and he's not there. And I'm annoyed. And I assume he's just not being respectful. He is not listening to me. He's not doing what I'm asking him to do. And so I go upstairs, stomp, stand in the doorway with my hands.
And here comes the middle name, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Or if you've got a lot of children, all the different names before, she actually gets to you.
Exactly.
But you get to the door, hands on your hip, and you just look at him and he's sitting there in the midst of his Legos or whatever he's doing. And you say, look, I called you 3 times. If you can't listen to me, then when you come home from school, there's no Lego. And he looks at you like, deer in the headlight. And that's the end of that. His relationship with you is weakened. He is totally amazed that his mom has just appeared and she's ready to fly off the handle. He hasn't heard her. Males are more, they have a beautiful ability to totally focus on one thing. Like they're just really good at it. Females, in general, there's a spectrum, but in general, females are extremely good at being multitasking all the time. There's always, a million plates on the go. For a male, he's single focused. So that little boy is up in his room and he is into what he's doing, oblivious to everything else. That's one aspect of that. The other aspect of that is the difference in the tone and the pitch between male and female voices. And for a little boy, that pitch is not, like sometimes as a female, I will hear a man and I'll think, oh, he's angry about something. But he's not. He's just talking, but his voice is louder than mine. And so it's received in a different way. Well, it's kind of the same, but the opposite for that little boy. So there's a chance that he didn't really hear his mom, that there's a good chance. And the other thing is he's totally focused on what he's doing. Had his mom, instead, after she was ready, she wanted him to come downstairs. If she went up those stairs, made some kind of contact, like put her hand on his shoulder or something, and say, "Did you hear me? Dinner's ready." And he'll look up and say, "Oh, good, I'm hungry." And that'll be it. But when we go from what we deliver to making the assumption that he heard us and he's deliberately ignoring us, then that's where all the conflict comes in and problems. So if we stop and say, "Did you hear me?" before we react and make assumptions, makes a big difference.
Now, I'm curious, how does this play into the whole question of ADHD? Because my boys my girls can be very high energy, and yet there's a very different quality to the energy of the boys. And I use the example when we spoke previously. My daughter may come skidding into the kitchen for dinner and, slam herself onto the bench because we had long benches to accommodate all these kids. But my boys, it's more just an explosion from every corner, and they're both high energy, but there's a different quality to it. And I believe you had mentioned boys are just going to have a harder time sitting still. These are qualities of ADHD. We were told one quality of ADHD is that you can be kind of scattered all over, or you can be hyper-focused. And so it sounds to me like some of these things that are more typical of boys are kind of being labeled ADHD. Where do you come down on that whole discussion?
Yeah, well, I think it's something we're more aware of now. I think there was certainly a period of time, not so far back, where that was the go-to response if that little boy couldn't, behave as the expectations were in the classroom. I think there are more conversations happening now and some changes being made in the classroom so that there's more of an understanding that system in general is geared toward how females learn. It's often, especially in the younger years, taught by females. So if there's no awareness of how that little boy learns the best, how he hears the best, how he communicates the best, then he is going to be faced with challenges that he shouldn't have to face. So of course, his self-esteem will take a nosedive because he can't do anything right. He's always getting in trouble. He's not focusing. And it's just a disservice. Like a lot of the little boys, they will start school, we've mentioned this, they're so excited. They're so excited to go to a big school, to be, they feel like a big boy. And before long, that spark starts to just fade away because they can't do it like the girls. And that's what the problem is. The system caters. Like I often say, like I went home, I would go home from school, from kindergarten to play school. I love playing school. I have never, ever met, although I'm sure there are exceptions, a little boy who comes home and wants to play school unless his sister is forcing him. So they want to come home and run and dig and play outside. And so it's almost like capturing a little animal in the classroom.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Now I'm curious, do you think that one of the answers to that is to separate the sexes into boys and girls schools as used to be more common, or do you see a different solution?
I think sometimes that's the easy response, and I don't know
Mhm.
that that's really it, especially when they're younger. I think there's great value in having, it more represent like real life. So, you have
Mhm.
your little boys, your little girls, they're all together, they're learning how to live together. If there were a strong case for single-sex schools or single-sex classes within
Mhm.
schools, I would say it's when they're out of elementary going into middle school.
Okay. And why do you feel it's more beneficial than earlier?
Um, a lot of it has to do with puberty and adolescence, and
Okay.
the girls continue to be more advanced, like between a year and a half, 2 years, more advanced than those little boys. So you get your boys in middle school who physically look bigger, are trying to be the tough, cool guys, and
Mhm.
are terrified to share deeply in case they make a fool of themselves. So if you've got an
Mhm.
English class, grade 7, grade 8 English class, mixed class, you are not going to be able to get the results you want from those little boys. They're not little boys, from those young boys, as much as if they were in a class just with boys.
Mhm.
So it's developmental, emotional.
Okay. Now, you also run a coaching business for parents of boys. I am curious, having been exposed to Lebanon, to Bangkok, to Japan, to Canada. Have I missed anything?
Georgia
Probably
and and and,
Georgia.
and Qatar.
And wow, I don't think you had mentioned that one. That's amazing. How much of your parenting ideas have kind of been putting together the different things you've seen of parenting in different cultures?
I've thought about that actually a great deal. And part of it, I think my perception is a little bit different because each of those environments, I've been in an international school systems.
Okay.
So we are getting a variety of children, and everybody is different. So,
Okay.
it's a little bit different than if you go into a national school system. And what I
Mhm.
really noticed as far as boys and parenting in general, there are more similarities than there are differences. Of course, you have cultures where, maybe the nanny and the drivers and all those people have more of an influence in actually taking care of the child than the parents.
Mhm.
But in general, there are just more similarities as far as, what the expectations or misaligned expectations for boys in all of our societies.
That's interesting that it's crossing societies because I would have thought some of this is some of the things we've talked about that are particular to American society. So I find it interesting that it
Well,
crosses cultures.
some of it is, but I think I mean, there are some cultures because they very much are patriarchal
Mhm.
um, countries. So the boys would have different expectations for behavior and all of that. So that's still there. That's in Japan, that's in a Middle Eastern country. It's everywhere.
Mhm.
But just as in North America, there are still the basic rules that society is saying this is the way you have to be as a boy, and that is often contrary to how that little boy is feeling inside authentically.
Mhm. So I hope your book reaches a lot of people. I have two more questions. What are some of the most common things when people come to you for coaching for parenting boys? What are two or three of the most common issues they're dealing with or struggles they have?
Behavior, behavior, behavior.
Always behavior. So, any particular kind of behavior, or what are your answers?
Well,
Top two or
a
three.
lot of the parents who do come to me, they are the type of parent who has been trying all the things. They've
Mhm.
read the books, they're in the Facebook groups, they're trying to do all the things, and there's just something that is
Yep.
not working. And they're still getting all the phone calls from school saying, or their kid is getting sent home, or his behavior is a little out of control. So
Mhm.
That's really the most common thing. And it might be one of the easiest things to counter once you have the understanding of what's going on in his world. Even if you can't, like I said in the reading, even if you can't change what's going on in society, what's going on in school, how he's taking all of that in, maybe you can't change that. But the minute that you understand it and you're able to explain it to him, and you're able to get really curious about his world, it all changes.
And what would some of that be? What are these boys experiencing that's leading to the behavior issues in school?
So every time that that little boy has a genuine response to something. So for example, he's learning how to ride a bicycle, and maybe he's out with his dad, maybe he's with his mom. And he falls down, hurts himself, he starts to cry. And the parent says, "Oh, come on, dust yourself off, get up, you'll do fine." And that little boy at that time is thinking, "I'm hurt." And maybe he really is hurt. "I'm hurt and I want to cry because it hurts. But if I cry, that's what dad is saying, that's not okay. Or mom is saying, that's not okay. So if I do that, I risk my connection with them. And they're the most important people in the world to me. So I have to hide my own feelings and be whatever they have said I should be so that I can stay really deeply connected with them." So his own feelings get pushed down. Every time something happens, he ends up putting on a mask to cover what he's really feeling. And that happens over and over and over again. And so at some point, something will happen and he will just explode. And that, if you look just at the behavior and you deal with the behavior, if he's, beaten up his sister and you deal with him beating up his sister because that's not acceptable to behave that way, and that's all you do, that's the surface. That's not addressing anything. But if you can get really curious and get to, okay, what's that unmet emotional need inside? Like, did something happen that he's been embarrassed, he's been shamed? Is he feeling not good enough? Is he feeling upset because his dad is going on a trip and he doesn't know how to say he's going to really miss him because it's not okay to share that kind of emotion? Whatever it is, if you can get curious enough to work out what is behind that wild explosion, then you have a real chance to connecting deeply with him. You still address the misbehavior, but that's only the first step.
Right. That's great advice. And I think sometimes, that can be very good advice for girls too. Try and figure out what's got them upset. Your book is Raising Boys to be Remarkable Men. What makes a man remarkable?
It's when it's a male that has come into his own. He knows who he is. He's kind and compassionate. He does the right thing because it's the right thing, whether anyone sees that he's doing it or not. He's the man that everybody wants to be connected with.
That's a great answer. Where can people find you online?
The best place to go is my website, Sonhood, HONSSON, hood, coaching.com. And from there, all the social media, the book link, everything is connected to sonhoodcoaching.com.
Fantastic. And I hope people will go there, learn more about raising boys. You can find me at booksandbrews.net, lauravosica.com. Our sponsor is gabrielshornpress.com. So you can go find lots of authors there. And you can find my sheep and my chickens and my rabbits at glenmerrill.wordpress.com. Our next interview coming up is Remington Kais, I believe he pronounces his name, who writes fantasy for young adults. So I'm looking forward to that. So thank you very much for being on the program. Cheers.
Thank you for having me, Laura.